There is a tree that pharmaceutical companies pay billions to find the active ingredient for. They source it from star anise grown in China. They negotiate government contracts to secure supply. During every flu outbreak of the last 20 years, the global shortage of this one compound has caused panic. And the tree that produces the identical molecule grows wild across 23 American states. It drops its seed pods onto lawns every October. Homeowners rake them up. Municipal trucks collect them. Landfills receive them. The pharmaceutical supply chain continues negotiating with China. The trees continue dropping medicine that nobody picks up, not because the compound was discovered recently, not because the supply chain cannot be changed, because the tree that drops the medicine is considered one of the most irritating trees in America, and nobody thought to look down. Subscribe and hit the bell. Every share helps preserve what they tried to erase. The archive opens in the forests of the eastern United States before European contact. Indigenous nations across the Appalachian corridor knew the sweetgum tree by the amber resin that oozed from cuts in its bark. The Cherokee called it a healing tree. The Choctaw used the hardened resin as a chewing substance to clean the teeth and freshen the breath. The Ojibwe boiled the inner bark to treat skin wounds and stop infections from spreading. Spanish colonists arriving in the 16th century sent the amber resin back to Europe, where it was sold as an incense and perfume ingredient. They called it liquid amber. The tree still carries that name in its scientific classification, liquid amber steraciiflua, liquid amber that flows. What nobody documented for 4 centuries was what was happening inside the seed pods. The spiky brown spheres that clung to branches through winter and rained down on lawns every October. The ones that rolled under feet and sent children sprawling. The ones that bent raked tines and jammed lawnmower blades. The ones that municipalities spent millions of dollars collecting and disposing of every autumn across the southeastern United States. Inside those pods was a compound that the pharmaceutical industry would eventually build a billion-dollar supply chain to source from the other side of the planet. This is the sweetgum, liquid amber, steraciiflua, a tree native to the eastern United States and parts of Central America. It grows from Connecticut to Florida, from the Atlantic coast to eastern Texas. It lines suburban streets. It fills city parks. It grows in schoolyard borders and along highway medians. The fall foliage is extraordinary. Star-shaped leaves that turn yellow, orange, burgundy, and deep red simultaneously, often on the same branch. Landscape architects plant it for the autumn display. Homeowners curse it from October through December when the seed pods arrive. A mature sweetgum produces thousands of pods per season. Each pod is a cluster of woody seed capsules fused into a sphere, roughly the diameter of a golf ball, covered in sharp projections that make stepping on them in bare feet an experience nobody repeats voluntarily. The pods hang from branches through winter and fall continuously over several months. A large tree can cover the ground beneath it in a carpet of pods that persists until someone removes them or until they decompose. They take years to decompose, which is exactly what makes the chemistry inside them significant. Shikimic acid, a cyclical compound produced by plants, fungi, and bacteria through a metabolic sequence called the Shikimic pathway. The pathway does not exist in mammals. Humans have no Shikimic pathway. This means compounds that interfere with this pathway harm microorganisms without harming human cells. This is why it became the foundation for antiviral drug development. In the 1990s, chemists at Roche working on influenza treatment began a 10-step synthesis process that converted shikimic acid into oseltamivir phosphate. They named it Tamiflu, the drug that would become the world's primary defense against influenza pandemic. The primary source for the shikimic acid Roche needed was star anise, Elysium, a small tree native to southern China and northern Vietnam. Its dried fruit pods contain shikimic acid at concentrations between 5 and 8% of dry weight. China controls approximately 90% of global star anise production. The supply chain runs from 8 provinces of southern China through extraction facilities to Roche's manufacturing operation in Switzerland, and then to government, stockpiles, and pharmacy shelves worldwide. In 2005, H5N1 avian influenza spread across Asia. Governments panicked. The death rate in confirmed human cases exceeded 50%. Epidemiologists warned that an adapted strain transmissible between humans could kill millions. Health ministries that had spent years building pandemic preparedness frameworks discovered that the framework depended on one supply chain, one compound, one source: star anise from 8 provinces of southern China. Every government with a pandemic preparedness budget began ordering simultaneously. Overnight, the global demand for shikimic acid exceeded the total global supply of star anise that could be harvested, dried, and processed within any useful time frame. The star anise plant takes 6 years to reach maturity. The harvest happens once a year. The drying and extraction process takes additional months. There was no emergency supply that could be switched on. There was no reserve that had been set aside. The pipeline was operating at full capacity for normal demand. Pandemic demand was not normal. Roche could not keep pace. Countries that had existing contracts waited months for delivery. Countries without existing contracts discovered that money alone was insufficient when the raw material did not exist in sufficient volume. Poland ordered Tamiflu. It waited. Vietnam ordered Tamiflu. It waited. Australia ordered Tamiflu. It waited. The United States government eventually committed $1.5 billion to Tamiflu, stockpiling over several years, entering multi-year agreements specifically because single-year purchasing could not guarantee supply. The United Kingdom spent over £500 million. The supply chain held, barely, because H5N1 never achieved efficient human-to-human transmission. But the vulnerability was now documented in precise dollar terms and in the public record of every health ministry in the world. 4 years later, H1N1 arrived. The 2009 swine flu pandemic, within weeks of the outbreak, pharmacies across the United States and Europe reported shortages. Hospitals rationed their supplies. Governments released strategic stockpiles into the general population ahead of schedule. School districts closed. Borders tightened. And the same conversation about star anise supply, Chinese export capacity, and roach production limits repeated in every health ministry in the Western world. The same fragility, the same one point of failure, the same country controlling 90% of the raw material. In a laboratory at the University of Rochester, a researcher had been looking at a different source. The analysis was published in 2009. Researchers confirmed that the seed pods of liquid ember Staurophilua, the sweetgum tree, contained shikimic acid at concentrations between 1.7 and 3.6% of dry weight, lower than star anise. But the sweetgum tree is not grown on 8 provinces of Chinese farmland. It grows wild and untended across the eastern United States in numbers that no agricultural operation on Earth can match. Estimates place the mature sweetgum population in the continental United States at over 2 billion trees, each tree producing pods twice a year in some regions, once a year in most. The sheer volume of pods that fall untouched every October represents a shikimic acid supply that has no analog in the global pharmaceutical supply chain. The analysis was peer-reviewed and published. It was not acted upon. Roche's global Tamiflu sales exceeded $3.2 billion in pandemic years. The compound inside the drug was being literally discarded by the ton across the American South every autumn while the pharmaceutical company negotiated with Chinese suppliers over price and volume. The math was not complicated. The decision to ignore it was. So here is what the pharmaceutical supply chain does not want examined. Roche held the patent on the oseltamivir synthesis until 2016 in most markets. During the H5N1 panic in 2005, they refused to license the manufacturing process to generic producers. Governments begged. The World Health Organization applied pressure. Roche eventually allowed limited sub-licensing to specific manufacturers in specific countries, but only under terms that kept the core of the production process proprietary. They controlled not just the drug, but the knowledge of how to make it. A domestic shikimic acid source would only help if the synthesis could be replicated outside Roche's facilities. After the patents expired, generic versions became available in many markets, but the supply chain for shikimic acid never diversified. Star anise from China remains the primary source today. The sweetgum pods go to landfills. But there is one more part of this story. The part that happened after the pandemic scares. The part that reveals exactly how the system responds when an inconvenient natural source becomes too visible. Nurseries and municipal landscaping programs began aggressively promoting a specific cultivar of sweetgum, beginning in the 1990s and accelerating through the 2000s. Liquid amber Staurophilua, a sweetgum tree that produces no seed pods. None. The irritating brown spheres that rolled across sidewalks and jammed lawnmowers and contained shikimic acid were bred out entirely. The Rotunda loba cultivar retains the spectacular fall color. It retains the fast growth, retains everything that makes Sweetgum desirable as a landscape tree. It produces 0 pods. Cities adopted it for street planting programs. Landscape architects specified it in commercial developments. Nurseries promoted it specifically on the basis that it eliminated the annual pod problem. Today, thousands of Rotundi loba sweetgums grow in American cities where mature pod-bearing trees once stood. The pods that annoyed homeowners were the problem. The medicine inside them was not mentioned in the nursery catalog. The suppression was not active, it was structural. Nobody called a meeting and decided to ignore Sweetgum pods. The pharmaceutical supply chain operates through established relationships, capital investment, and regulatory frameworks built over decades. Roche had extraction agreements with Chinese processors. Those processors had relationships with star anise farmers. The entire operation was optimized for one raw material from one part of the world. Introducing a domestic alternative would require new extraction infrastructure, new regulatory approval pathways, new supply agreements, and a willingness to disrupt a system that was generating billions in revenue exactly as it was. Systems do not disrupt themselves. The Sweetgum pods were not a threat to the supply chain. They were simply irrelevant to it. Irrelevant is often more durable than suppressed. Between 2010 and 2020, global Tamiflu sales generated over $7 billion for Roche. The drug is classified as an essential medicine. By the World Health Organization, governments hold it as a strategic reserve. Hospitals dispense it within 48 hours of flu symptom onset to reduce both severity and duration. It is the pharmaceutical infrastructure of pandemic response. And beneath that infrastructure, autumn by autumn, the Sweetgum trees of the American South and Midwest continued dropping their pods. The Cherokee elders who called the tree a healer did not know about oseltamivir. They knew the tree healed. They knew the resin worked. They knew the pods had purpose. 300 years of indigenous knowledge pointed at a tree that the pharmaceutical supply chain spent decades rooting around. The process of making the medicine is not simple chemistry performable in a home kitchen. Extracting shikimic acid from Sweetgum pods, purifying it, and converting it to oseltamivir through a 10-step synthesis requires laboratory equipment and pharmaceutical expertise. This is not a guide to home Tamiflu production. It is not possible, and claiming otherwise would be dangerous. What is possible is understanding what grows on your property and why it matters. The Sweetgum tree in your yard is not a nuisance. With an unfortunate byproduct, it is a pharmaceutical raw material that $1 billion supply chain sources from the other side of the planet because nobody has structured the extraction differently. If you have a Sweetgum tree, do not remove the pods. Do not discard them. The research that has been published is accessible. University chemistry and pharmacy programs have been experimenting with alternative shikimic acid sources for over a decade. The pods can be dried and stored. Their chemical content does not degrade quickly. Organizations working on pandemic preparedness and pharmaceutical supply chain independence have documented Sweetgum as a viable domestic source pending industrial processing development. What you can do practically is preserve awareness. Know what the tree produces. Know what it contains. Know that the compound in those pods is chemically identical to the compound that governments pay China to provide in a supply chain that has already demonstrated its fragility during 3 separate pandemic scares. When the next one comes, and epidemiologists agree there will be a next one, the stockpile conversation will happen again. The shortages will happen again. The panic over Chinese star anise supply will happen again. And 2 billion Sweetgum trees will be dropping their pods onto lawns across 23 American states. Right on schedule, the tree has been doing this since before the pharmaceutical industry existed, since before synthetic chemistry, since before anyone understood what shikimic acid was or why it mattered. The Cherokee knew the tree healed. They did not know the mechanism, they knew the result. 2 billion trees worth of result produced every October, collected into orange municipal bags, transported to landfills, buried under everything else that the system decided was waste. If you have a Sweetgum tree, contact your state agricultural extension program. Several universities have active research programs on alternative shikimic acid sourcing. Dried pods can be collected and preserved. Store them in paper bags in a cool, dry location away from moisture. The pods do not require refrigeration. The shikimic acid content remains stable in dried pods for extended periods. Researchers at several institutions are developing community-based collection programs that would allow households to contribute to a domestic supply network rather than discarding what grows free on their property every autumn. Know the tree by its leaves. The sweetgum leaf is star-shaped with 5 to 7 pointed lobes. Hold one up and it looks like a maple leaf that went to 7 points instead of 5. In autumn, the leaves turn yellow, orange, red, and deep burgundy, often all on the same branch. The seed pods are the spiky brown spheres the size of golf balls. They arrive in October. They persist through winter. They are the part the nursery industry is breeding out of existence. The pods are still falling. The supply chain is still vulnerable to the same disruption it demonstrated in 2005 and again in 2009, and continues to demonstrate with every flu season that strains it. The compound inside those pods has not changed. The trees have not changed. The supply chain is still fragile. The negotiations with China continue. The trees do not know any of this. They do what they have always done. Drop medicine onto lawns. Wait for someone to notice. If this story opened something for you, subscribe to DTD Stories and hit the bell. Every like and every share preserves what they tried to erase. The next story opens soon.